Okay, let's see if my mic's back.
Sounds like it. Oh.
Yeah, hold on. There we go.
It's back.
Right. Perfect. Sorry about that. Hey, everyone. Thanks for joining us today on Seattle Data Guy Live. Hey, Veronika, how are you doing?
I am very good. How are you?
Doing good, doing good. Yeah, so for this one, I wanted to talk about, data modeling. In particular, I know you've done a few migrations from like on-prem onto cloud, so I think there'd be some interesting things there as people out there are trying to make that transition. So yeah, before we dive into that, I was like kind of figuring out, what people do outside of the data world.
I know this is funny. Such a great question because nobody really asks ever. Let's see. So outside of work, I have a family. I'm a mom. You can see in my LinkedIn, I'm chief mom officer. I have it's a business. You got to run it. You're the CEO, COO, you're the nurse, you're the, you know, comfort mom. My son once said that I'm comfort mom because when he feels miserable, he likes to stick by my side. Food, a lot of logistics, transporting kids, so that kind of takes a bit of time. I try to work out just like everybody else. We're kind of all collectively gained a bit of a COVID padding. Um, and also, I actually absolutely love data. So I do a lot of it, preparing presentations, trying to blog. So I spend a lot of time, especially now that my kids are a little bit older, on just doing this. Super cool. My husband thinks I work a ton, but actually a lot of my work is unpaid, just because I enjoy it. So yeah.
Yeah, data somehow eventually becomes all encompassing, right? Where it's like you can go to an event, even if it's not about data, and suddenly you're like talking about the nuances of some weird esoteric concept that everyone else is like, what are you talking about?
I mean, it's information, right? Data is information, and we love information. We love to learn. We love to make decisions, hopefully based on some information. Yeah.
Yeah. So then more in terms of the data world, how'd you get here? How did you get into working with data? Because it always feels like it's interesting hearing the various paths. It's never like I wanted to work in data day one. So yeah.
Right. It's funny. I was kind of like reflecting on that. So, I fell into data just like everybody else does, it seems. But I fell into data back when data wasn't really a thing at all. But I've spent my entire career in data. So I was like, can I still say that I fell into data? Uh, but so, I went to college as pre-med, you
Mm,
know, kind of because I don't know, nobody goes to college to be, I don't know, a data engineer. Still, they still don't, by the way.
yeah.
So, but I don't particularly care for medicine. So I ended up taking like all the math classes that were offered, all the physics classes that were offered, ended up getting a Bachelor of Science degree in biology, absolutely deeply disliked biology, did not plan on going into medicine at all. Ended up doing kind of like I started as a data entry for hospital lab. And a woman that I worked with, she said her husband was looking for a computer operator. So I was like, all right, cool, I'll get that job. And then I fell into a junior DBA role
Mm.
and absolutely fell in love with it. I was like, I get it. This is my thing. I love it. It gives me a little bit of coding. It gives me ability to like logically think through things. And at that time, I was like, okay, cool. I need to get a degree. There was no data degree, so I ended up getting master's degree in software engineering. I enjoy coding. I never, however, like back then VB.NET just came out. I'm like, oh my god, I love it. Hated Java. Don't judge. Um, but yeah, absolutely loved it. I didn't actually start working with computers in general, doing anything outside of just typing in documents until Windows 95. So I'm not one of those kids who like played with computers. I actually started pretty late, but when something clicks with you, you just kind of stick with it.
My audio is set. Okay, there we go. My audio keeps being weird. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes, you can hear me, but I can't hear you. Let me just audio.
Can you hear me now?
Decided to be weird today. Sorry. Yep, I can. Yeah, no, I think that makes sense in terms of like your path, starting on that junior DBA, and I think that's kind of what I fell into too, in terms of like that, like it's a job that kind of gives you some coding, some system work, it's really a little bit of everything. So you can kind of, you never really get bored to some degree.
A lot of troubleshooting, like it's always like under pressure, and you realize you succeed as a DBA if you don't crumble under pressure, because like their job is full-time under pressure of some firefighting.
Yeah, maybe that's it. Maybe we enjoy that like little bit of firefighting that we get,
Yeah,
and it's kind of the same thing in data engineering, right? Like it's like, oh, pipelines are failing. Let's go be the hero for today. So maybe there's something there as well. Well, for this specific, conversation, I really want to talk about data modeling, because I think, towards the end, or maybe it was like middle of last year, I think suddenly everyone on LinkedIn and data Twitter were like, data modeling, it's the thing that we're all missing, right? So it really became this topic that I think everyone started to discuss. And I was watching a live that you did with Joe and Matt, the people who wrote Fundamentals of Data Engineering. And I recommend you started talking about data modeling. So I just want to ask, how do you recommend people kind of get started in like understanding how data modeling works and how to kind of set up their future data models?
Yeah. Again, great question. So in my mind, there are different data modeling. There's data modeling for kind of like your transactional operational data, which is, that's where you get into third normal form or maybe some sort of JSON, NoSQL, not relational. And then there's analytical modeling. So the like OLTP modeling for online transactional, it's focused on fast writes and fast reads, and analytical is focused on reads, right? Cranking through a lot of data. I would start with just fundamentals, get a basic book on third normal form, understand what it is. Read about various, document store databases, basically whatever variety of NoSQL is. And then for analytical side, dimensional Kimball modeling, basic book, just Kimball book, read through it, understand what dimensions and facts are, star schema, what it is. And then you can slowly work your way up to, I'm a fan of Data Vault. I don't know why people think it's mysterious or complicated. It's not. It actually makes total sense to me, but again, I understand not everybody gets it. So that's another great thing. There aren't easy to digest books on Data Vault modeling.
Maybe you just answered the question.
Yeah. So, well, actually not true. So there's a great book written by Ken Graciano. It's pretty small, and it's actually, I mean, I love Ken. I think he's amazing. But storytelling in a way that's easy to understand. So I would probably start with that book.
Okay.
It's small. It highlights all the important keywords. Like it's very visually written. Again, start with basic. I think, as I'm kind of thinking about it, read books first. I feel like books at least still go through a very rigorous process of reviews, and there are a lot of people involved to make sure that the information that's in books is correct. Versus if you go down, to the wilderness of the internet, you might or might not get correct information. So get you basic foundation, and then you can start browsing.
Yeah, I think there's some validity there. Someone who writes, right? Like sometimes you're like, man, it's almost too free for me to be able to just post something on the internet and and then you realize, I think I talked to Joe about, the process that he went through for writing his book, and like you write it and then you have like technical editors read it and tear it apart and be like, you're wrong, or you're being inconsistent with your terminology. So yeah, it's like books just go through a lot more work in terms of like trying to make that final product.
It's just mind-boggling incredible, and my hats off to Joe and Matt and everybody who writes books. It's a serious commitment, and it goes through a lot of rigor.
So yeah, as much as I enjoy people who read my blogs, I try to go through as much as I can, but it's just my brain, which is one reason I like talking to other people, because you just get so much more context. I mean, like, so you brought up Data Vault, so I'm just curious, like, how do you tell people how to conceptualize that? I'm just curious, like, how would you kind of...
I'm gonna say something and maybe get yelled at, but then hopefully not. The simplest way I can describe Data Vault is that it's organized by business concept data lake. So it's insert only. You get a snapshot, in time of how the record looked like in your source, but it's organized by business concept. So it's like oversimplification. But if you really kind of like look at it at a very high level, and please forgive me for like generalizing it, but to me, that's what it means. But because you have that audit, you have that history, it's point in time, it's again organized by business concept, you can do a lot on top of it. Data lakes are complicated because they're a mess. You don't know what's where, but it's kind of like it's organized. You built it in the way that your business operates.
I mean, you hope it's organized.
Well, I mean,
You said data lake, so
well,
I'm like,
okay.
I've seen some that were not. So
So I would say that like the other thing, like I had this presentation done a couple of times. Everything we're building today is legacy tomorrow.
yes,
Like, and
yes.
I'm not even exaggerating. So you're doing your best. You want to make sure whatever you built can be easily adjusted based on what comes at you tomorrow, and that's the best you can do.
Yeah, yeah. And I think that's always the challenge. You know, that's why I like sometimes even when I look at like other people's code, you know, and I'm like, oh, what were they thinking? I'm always like, you know what? I'm not that much smarter than the average person. So I imagine based on whatever restrictions they had, whether that was time, whether that was money, whether that was, you know, knowledge, they did the best that they could. And I'm sure someone's gonna look at the same stuff I've done and do the exact same thing. You know, it's gonna be like 6 months later, who did this? And then
Have you
half the
looked
time
at
it's
your own code
I
like
was about
a
to
year
say,
later and went like, what? What? I mean, actually, that's why I comment my code because
yeah,
like it's not that I am nice to a person that comes after me. I am nice to myself when I look at my code and I can figure out why I did something. So like I write like a lot of silly comments. I was like, yeah, this is what I was thinking, and that's why I did it this way. Future
yeah.
me, please don't judge.
That's funny. That's funny. Like with, you know, you referenced a lot of books. How do you kind of recommend people separate books that's kind of theory with kind of what's being done in the real world? Do you see like there kind of being some sort of separation there?
And that's why your blogs and your YouTube videos come in handy. So there is theory, and we have to absolutely learn it. But theory, to me, works in the perfect world. We don't live in the perfect world. There's a lot, and you mentioned that there's a lot of constraints that come in us. Sometimes we have to, go with speed versus, you know, money quality, right? Like there are a lot of decisions that we make, a lot of trade-offs. Sometimes we don't know what we don't know. And this is where kind of like practice is in real life slightly different than what a book tells us. And I'll give you like an example. I've learned early on. Again, I was on the operational like DBA side of things, and third normal form. Nobody ever built a pure third normal form. You have to optimize your database for both reads and writes. So I was
Yeah.
like, you can slightly denormalize it. It's okay. Because what is it that you're trying to accomplish with your, data model, with your database design? Oh, you want this and that. Okay, cool. Here's a compromise. Is it by the book? No. We've done a lot of like I've learned through my career where there's some hard rules that we should follow, but everything else we can try to push on and see how far we can get. And this is also, I think, where innovation comes in, right? Like, okay, cool, there's a box. We can think inside the box, but we can also step outside and see what else we can do.
Yeah. Do you have any good examples on some of those hard rules that you tell people that you feel like these kind of don't shift that much?
Um, Not really. Like around data vault, there's some basic foundational rules that are kind of honestly also very logical. So you wouldn't necessarily break it, but the rest, no good examples.
Mhm.
Other than like I'll give you actually a rule, and I don't know if you know SQL Server, the no log hint dirty reads,
I
and
don't
it's like
know that specifically, but
so what is sorry, uh, if I get it into deep, but
no, please.
basically, so there's consistent, right? Asset property of the database. It like you can only read committed data,
Hmm.
but when you're trying to read a lot of data on a transactional database, it has a shared lock. So writes are basically blocked.
Yeah.
To avoid that, you can be like, I'll read dirty, just give me whatever's on the disk right now, which means
Okay.
that
Okay.
you won't necessarily get the right data.
Mm.
So it's a trade-off that we made. We're like, okay, cool, we have to run some kind of like not massive, but pretty large queries. We don't want to block our website from working. So we accept the fact that we might not get the exactly correct, consistent data. And that's like a no in some people's mind, but in my mind, I started working like back in early 2000 for monster.com.
Yeah.
It was backed up by SQL Server.
Yeah.
You can be like, that makes no sense. SQL Server can handle it, but it could, because we
Yeah.
had to make these trade-off decisions along the way. So it's kind of like, sure, it depends. Like you'll hear me say it a lot, not because I'm a consultant or want to be a jerk. I can actually explain why there are certain decisions that we make and trade-offs.
Yeah, yeah, and that makes me think of like like especially like early NoSQL databases were often like that, where it was like
Mm,
you kind of accept the fact that it's not perfect all the time, and
yeah,
that's part of the way it is for a lot of them. Not all of them. I shouldn't categorize
yeah,
all of them there, but they're like that. And also on your comments in terms of like, oh, how can SQL Server handle that? I mean, I always like to point out that like Facebook on its backend is run on MySQL, which
yeah.
you're like, how? It's like, they built a system to manage it.
Because they have people that like make these decisions, push the system further than it by the book can go,
Yeah,
but that know enough to make those trade-off decisions. I think that's kind of where it breaks. There are people that come in that don't necessarily have experience, and they feel like they do, and they make these decisions and they go down the path, not really fully understanding the implications of the trade-offs they're making,
yeah.
which is fine. Another funny story, I was at some meetup somewhere and somebody was saying, oh, our reporting can only return data for like 10 customers at a time. And I'm like, oh, I bet you have no SQL database behind the scenes.
Mm.
They're like, yes. So that was a bad decision somebody make to store data in non-relational database, knowing like or not knowing that they'll have to do analytics on it at some point.
Yeah. Yeah. NoSQL, generally not a great place for analytics, generally.
Generally.
And what was I just? Oh, that makes me think of LinkedIn. So every once in a while, I like edit one of my posts on LinkedIn, and like I'll go like to a new browser and it'll be updated, but I'll go to my browser and it will remain the same. And I don't, maybe it's cached, but I don't know if it's cached or if it's like a database somewhere that's updating. And it's
I
like,
usually call it eventual consistency.
yeah,
I was actually for fun chatting with Joe, and the timing of messages that he sent me aligned that his response to my previous message came later. It was just funny. It's like, it was like, did you just say that? But it was just the time. Like funny things happen. It's like, aha, eventual consistency,
yes, yes.
which is again fine.
What was I thinking? In terms of like modern kind of data warehousing, in terms of cloud data warehousing, do you feel like there's like things that are different that we do now that uh, probably weren't the same before?
Absolutely. By the way, like I mean, I don't know, like modern data stack is dead, but I get it now. It's the modern part that's dead. The
Yeah,
data stack is not dead, which is like, I'm
yeah,
like, please no, please don't go back to the data center. I don't want to. I think what the whole cloud scalability enabled us to do is, and I kind of like, I'm going to be aging myself a little, throw hardware at it easily. Any problem that we have, we can solve by throwing more compute at it. When we were in data centers and we had that computer rack and we could only fit so much into it, we actually had to focus on optimizing, right, what we have to run on the hardware that we have. So we were forced to do it. Like it wasn't just because we were nice. Now in the cloud, we're like, well, let's just get a bigger box. Let's throw more compute at it. Like, why bother? And that ends up costing money. So instead of focusing on optimizing our code, thinking through architecture, do we really need all of this? Do we really need to run it this often? We're just like, oh, let's go to a bigger warehouse. And I mean like compute warehouse.
yeah. The way I always kind of think of it is like before we used to care about like how many bytes is this column, right? Like because like then you could like calculate, okay, so every new row is X amount of space. We have however much space on our rack, so we'll run out in 2 years, and then we'll need to do a new project to migrate to something bigger. And now we've gone to the point where it's like the restraint is no longer the memory you have on your whatever server you're using. It's now how much is it going to cost me.
Yeah.
That's your new restraint. Like I actually had a conversation with someone. They're like, oh, I don't want to be restrained by that. It's like that is the restraint. Like
Yeah.
you are not restrained by compute or storage. Like those are
You're
how much
straight.
do you need,
Yeah.
to some degree.
Which is actually funny. When we migrated, like my team and everybody I worked with who's familiar with on-prem, when we migrated to the cloud, everybody was afraid to run queries because they knew that every query actually costs money.
Yeah.
So it's like kind of like that mentality, like, oh, we had a data center, we could do whatever, but we're constrained. But again, like I know we all try to do the right thing, but trying to do the right thing out of the kindness of our own hearts, like, yeah, okay, this is not going to work. We have to be really kind of forced to do things like, in a data center, we're constrained by like physical hardware, but in the cloud, it's cost, it's like dollars or whatever, currency you're using. Um,
Yes, yeah, yeah. Or credits, as
cre-
we've.
cre- credits, right? That's the world unified currency that is associated with your local currency. Yeah.
Yeah, how much Snowflake credits, how much Databricks, I don't know what Databricks compute or however they're running theirs, or yeah. That's do you, like, when you've migrated, are there's like some decisions you've feel like you've made that were very distinct to being like, oh, we're going from, whatever, on-prem to this cloud, that you can remember, that you tell most people, be like, here's things you should probably do.
So my very first migration, which was not even like bleeding edge, right? Like it wasn't like we weren't one of the first companies. I actually did my first migration at Sonos, not like 6 years ago, maybe. So it wasn't like, and we were migrating SQL Servers from on-prem to the cloud. And that was like, I think that's when I truly fell in love with the cloud. I was like, I'm not going back to the data center. What they suggested as an AWS, kind of like, I think solution architects for any tool, when they come in, they're like, oh, we'll present something that is similar and comfortable to you. So what they suggested how we migrate to like the architecture was kind of matching one to what we had, but it was going to cost us a ton of money.
Yeah.
So what we've done is we're like, okay, cool, we're in AWS now. There's so much, like so much. We migrated our servers onto completely different like architecture, different EC2s, and it was a mind switch. We're like, okay, cool. What can we do? So we ended up moving all of our servers into high availability to cheaper machines, faster machines. But it's like AWS was like, but that's not what we're recommending. I'm like, that's okay. So we've tested out and moved it. And this is kind of like how my mind works. When you're in the cloud, it's different. And you should bring your foundation with you of everything you've learned, with whatever you're working. But when you move to the cloud, understand how that specific cloud works and take full advantage of it.
Yeah.
Like pay whatever you pay, but do more with it, right? I'm at that point, I'm like, oh, we're gonna pay whatever we pay, but I want to do more. I want to like fully take advantage and squeeze whatever I can out of them.
Yeah. Yeah. I think it's interesting though, like that they gave you kind of this, I assume is kind of a lift and shift approach. They're like, yeah, just make it the exact same, which is like, but that's not what we should be doing. We should be saying, okay, what's this new paradigm? How can we be better?
Yeah.
Or, how can we take full advantage of it? Maybe it might not even be better. It's just like different, like you said earlier, there's different constraints, different benefits. And if you don't acknowledge that, you're just going to maybe build something that's worse, or, not as performant, or, just miss out on opportunities of the new system.
With the cloud, also the other thing is like there's some things that we took for granted in the data center, like networking. Cloud is different, and that was like the downside, right? Like, okay, cool, now throughput, you're paying for throughput, that's extra, you have to get it. It's so cloud is different. I just kind of like, I can't stress enough, it's different. You can't think and build architecture things the same way if you really want to like take full advantage of the cloud.
Yeah. The throughput makes me think, when I did, it wasn't so much a migration to the cloud, but a migration to like someone else's data center. Essentially, we ended up figuring out that one of the codes that we were using was essentially like pulling data onto a local computer and then pushing it back to wherever. And when it was like, when the data center was on-prem, it was like,
You didn't know. Yeah.
fine, it's fast. And as soon as we did it, when it was farther, it was like, this is gonna take 2 days to run this process that used to take like 30 seconds.
Yeah.
So it was one of those, and then you figure out, okay, we got to
You're
run
like
it
when
over
you're like
there.
servers on the same rack, you're like, oh, it's no big deal.
No big deal.
Yeah. Now
So,
they're
yeah.
different ends of data center. Like, wait, what happened?
Yeah, that was funny. Little things you learn. Yeah, any other tips for data modeling before I kind of maybe jump into the head of data style questions that I had?
Yeah. I mean, data modeling, like, I mean, I know it's like it became hot last year, and I know like older generation of data models rolled their eyes, and I was like, yeah, cool. Let's jump on the hype and let's kind of try to educate as many people as we can while it's in style, right? And hopefully some people will see the value. To me, value is like, kind of like twofold, right? I grew up seeing how data models impact performance, improve or not, how your system are performing. And if your things run faster, they're cheaper.
Yeah.
So there's like that's a given. And the other side of it, which we've also experienced, if your model reflects your business, you're golden.
Yeah.
Then you can easily adjust it, you can swap sources, you can do a lot of things. You can also look back and see what your business was like, in the past. So they're kind of like two big things. One's business focused, one's actually truly optimization, kind of cost focused.
Yeah. Yeah, I think this maybe goes to the post that I post on LinkedIn where it's like, look, you can dump all your data and say we'll deal with it later,
Mm.
but you will. You have to deal
Yeah.
with it at some point, and it will be through cost because you have to compute more because it's like, oh, it's raw, so
Mhm.
now you got to process it more, and it'll be through time where people are like, it's not standardized, it doesn't represent your business directly, there's no clear model, and now you're just kind of stuck figuring out how all these pieces go together. So
Like you have no idea. It's like how many, like I'm sure you have idea why this is the same metric, why the number's different. Like, and it's like one of those duh moments, right? Like, yeah, I mean, and you when you make a decision not to put thought into how you model your data and do quick, you will be in that situation. Like, there's no way to avoid it. You will end up with two numbers that are the same, two metrics that are the same that are not matching.
yeah. I mean, you risk that even with a good data model for all.
Oh,
So it's like it's guaranteed on one side, and the other side it's like, well, that's probably your fault for how you pulled it versus
and it's like the great point about good data model. You may like it's as good as what you know about your business at that point in time.
yeah,
So your model is not static. It's not once it's done. It's going to continuously improve on it, and potentially your business definitions will change or whatever it is. So like you'll keep working on it. Yeah.
yeah, makes sense. Cool. All right. So now diving into the head of data kind of section of this, I've seen a few different job descriptions for head of data. One almost came off more as a marketer, but for me, I always picture it as more of a someone that's in charge of data. So how would you kind of define that role, head of data?
Yeah. So I think it's still very like general, like the CDOs, head of data's, whatever, very still young role. For me, and again, kind of like I forgot the prefix, like my opinions are my own, right, and don't represent the company, just kind of like fine print. To me, I'm clearly more hands-on. So to me, head of data is somebody who's responsible for kind of data ecosystem that is set up in a way they can grow with business and deliver value, right? So it's kind of like, what is it's those like 3 or 4 P's. Your platform. You want to make sure that your platform is set up in a way that it kind of grows and adapts
Mm-hmm.
to all the advancements, outside, and also how your business grows. People, that you have the right skill sets, that you grow your people. Um, Process.
Mm,
I mean, if you don't have a process, you kind of screw. There's data governance, there's CI/CD, data ops, and also the other P, and I think it was Scott Taylor who said it, partners. We are getting into a territory of data exchange, right? Private sharing, public sharing, productionalizing your data. Do you sell it maybe for some companies? For other companies, it's your data clean rooms, whatever that is. You are actually, every company has a lot of interesting data that they can take advantage of
yeah.
for their competitive advantage.
Yeah, I like that. I mean, I like that you kind of brought up partners and like sharing data, just because that is such a it's not modern, but the way we are doing it is so different.
Mhm.
I keep telling people it's like if we can get rid of all SFTP like that exists,
Yeah.
I would be so happy. Like if in the future it's just like let me just share my data from wherever Snowflake and then you
Yeah.
just have that table that exists rather than like let me set up an SFTP job and you will now push it to your server
Mhm.
and whatever. There's a key involved and duplicate the data like 5 times in order to get it.
Yeah.
Uh,
And then it's like,
and
oh, yeah, SFTP, my gosh. It's like it feels so outdated, yeah, that it's still a pretty consistent way to exchange data in a safe way too, right?
yeah. So no, I'm really excited, and I think that's a great perspective. In terms of like hiring, because I think there's plenty of people who are listening who are looking for jobs. What do you generally look for in like who you're hiring?
I'm looking, so I'm looking for a how should I say, define skill sets across the entire team, right? So if there are any gaps, I'm trying to make sure that we have somebody who brings expertise who can also help others learn. So I try to avoid having gaps in certain skill sets
Mm,
in general, and also try to balance having some very senior people with some more junior people. I love, and in data, it's probably like, at least what I've seen, various backgrounds. It, it's it's incredibly fascinating how people coming from different backgrounds bring interesting perspectives. It's like, and it's not necessarily like, I'm not even thinking like, I'm thinking like technical backgrounds, like in
mm,
my example, like DBAs, right? They're like, data observability is a new thing. Like, what about modern learning we've been doing for the past, I don't know, 3, 4 decades?
yeah,
And then you bring a software engineer, right? They're like, DevOps, agile, like this is not new. We've been doing this forever. So you kind of like pull on different, perspective and skill sets and backgrounds, and this is kind of like the team comes together and we have each other's backs.
yeah. No, I've always felt like data is such a broad field, right? Like, because you brought up earlier, right? You got programming, you've got whatever, and you probably you didn't reference analysts, but even like having more of that analytical mindset, right? Like maybe you might not have that in a software engineer, where it's like they don't really do dashboards or you know prepare data for users, but they're great for actually dealing with distributed data, systems or something
Yep.
like that that you may or may not need. And so,
Actually, an
yeah,
interesting thing about analysts, especially specifically the ones working with visualizations, I love when they come from some sort of artistic background. They just have an eye for like amazing, like this is art. How do create something that tells a story? You
yeah,
have to know how to attract people's attention. So it's like, I think data is amazing in this way. It's such a breadth of different things that we do, that pulling people from different, again, backgrounds, experiences is incredible.
yeah. No, it's a mix. So anyone out there who's looking for a job, it is a mix. We need so many
Yep.
different people.
Yep.
Um, Next, how do you kind of feel like you balance the right amount of kind of data governance and like innovation? Only in the sense that governance can kind of feel like it doesn't necessarily hinder it, but it definitely feels like it can slow down. Like maybe if you're trying to do fast, analytics or data science or ML, and if you're constantly having to like go back to some sort of governance layer, how do you feel about balancing those things?
It's an interesting question. I kind of like think of, I don't know, the thing that comes to mind is like highway. So there are highways everywhere in every country, and you can take any car on the highway. Even like, say, if you're in, England, you have steering wheel on the other side. You can still drive it in the U.S. highway, but you can't bring a horse on the highway because it's just dangerous. So that's kind of like data governance is hard rules.
Hmm.
If you break them, it's like we all work together. We have to kind of like conform to a small set of hard rules so that we can work together.
Mm-hmm.
The rest of it is like, what's stopping you from innovation? Sometimes I think where that's coming from is sometimes data governance is used like bureaucracy is used for a way to say no to things.
Mm, yeah.
Like I don't believe that. Like, but again, I've used SOX compliance to get something done in the past, even though it wasn't really for SOX compliance. It just felt a great thing to do.
Oh yeah, yeah.
So I kind of understand that push and pull, but I don't think data governance is slowing down innovation, not at all. But I also, at the same time, we do have to follow a certain set of rules to make sure that whatever we're building actually works well with everything else. And I think in the whole data mesh environment, right? If you go off and you build something that isn't interoperable with other stuff, like what's use in it, right? Like,
Yeah.
so you build something for your like little silo and cool, but like there's so much more than people can do with it, and you're just not helping anybody.
Yeah, no, I think it makes sense. I it's always one of those things where it's like I think you've kind of hit the nail on the head. In some companies, it's definitely probably used as this like tool to say no. It's like,
Yeah.
nope, which to some degree you're like, yeah, that sometimes is good because you just don't have enough resources or team members, and it's like you don't want to say that, or maybe you're tired of saying that, so it's like, well, we'll find another reason to say no. But yeah,
But I can see like, you know, testing and a lot of exploration, like especially around machine learning. You do a lot of exploration before you even do anything that's anywhere like usable by anybody. So you want to have that space, like safe space to explore, do something crazy. But once you're like, cool, this actually makes sense, provides value, then you have to standardize it to the whatever the rules are for your organization, platform, etc. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's work. I mean, I know we don't like to do that. Some of it is probably mundane, but gotta play nice.
No, that makes sense.
Gotta share your toys, right?
Yes. Finally, especially like as things are feeling tighter for some people, like in value, and data teams are probably looking at what they're driving value wise a little more. How do you feel like data teams and being ahead of data? How do you feel like you drive value for the company?
So there are a few things. There are like, a lot of data teams working on kind of like basic operational stuff to just support day-to-day operations. There's nothing wrong with that. And that there's a massive drive to how do we use data to either improve our tools, improve our customer experiences. For some companies, maybe it's to sell it. So it's a balance. You can't go one way or the other, right? Like
Mhm.
you support it. So, as a data lead, like I want to make sure that I have a great process for my business to tell me what's important and kind of for them to see what else is in flight. Like we get into this, as a data team situation where we get all these requests and it's just chaotic, right? And nobody knows what's important. But like when there's transparency into what's important, what people are asking for, how can we combine it? Like that product mindset. Like, do we work on one use case, or can we like spend a little more time and actually build something that is a product that multiple teams can use,
Mm,
in various different ways? So this is kind of where I looked at it. But also like as a lead of a team, it's important to spend time on paying off tech debt.
mm,
I just like business doesn't care about it. They don't they don't care about it until something breaks, right? It's kind of like my life as a DBA. Nobody knew I existed until something broke. And I kind of continued to live in a world where people didn't know I existed. And for that, I had to spend time to actually fix any tech debt, like any trade-off that we make, any decision that we make could potentially cause any issues. So again, this is like a very important part of any lead of any team really, is that there's a certain amount of time spent on kind of like paying off that tech debt.
how do you do anything to like convince the company that it's worth doing? I asked that because like Facebook, we do a fixathon either, I don't know if it was every 6 months or something, and that's how they convinced us all to fix things. It's just like, all right, we're gonna just do it for everybody, and the people who fix the most things get a prize. So I'm curious, like how you kind of convince people to work on that kind of stuff.
I think like we've tried a few things where like 1 day per sprint or one sprint dedicated to tech debt, or we we're trying to play around with it. I think the difficult part, like you want to make it fun, but the difficult part is that there is no like business value per se that you can measure for things that are not broken. And that's why you often like, oh, don't fix it unless it's broken. But when it's broken, it's too late, right? So
Yeah.
we don't want to be in a situation where it's broken. So yeah, I still trying different things. If anybody has a great kind of way to spend on tech debt, it'll be amazing if you could share.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm just again like thinking back. Most big tech companies are like you get your promotions generally based on new things you do. It's sometimes if you can invent and simplify, you'll get it. But like I know like there was like a live with Elon Musk talking about it recently and like being like, yeah, we need to refactor. And like people point out, it's like, well, the reason any company gets to that point is because they keep getting promoted to build new things, not to
Mhm.
go back and fix
Yep.
old things. It's like that's not how you add value generally to most of these companies. So
It's
they just
also
keep,
like it's not a value that's easy to measure, and it's not glamorous work.
yeah,
So that's why like nobody wants to do it, which I get it. Nobody's really pushing anybody to do it. It's just like you just have to. Like, do you change oil in your car? And I'm like, keep bringing up cars, but like if you don't, it'll break at some point. Do you really want to wait until then and then your car's busted, or you just suck it up and go to your dealership every whatever 6 months?
mm, yeah. I'm very bad at that. I always wait like another like 4 weeks until I'm like, oh, the light's on, and then
Yeah, and then you
yeah.
imagine just like your car just falls apart, and you're like,
No, it
oops.
hasn't fallen apart. It's a decade old. It hasn't fallen apart just yet.
I think they
Uh,
built in something. They're like, okay, for people like Ben, we say it's now, but it's really 2 months from now.
yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm banking on. It's like this is yeah. All right. So kind of going bigger picture. Where do you kind of see the data world in 5 years? I know it's somewhat of a leap, but it's better than 10.
Yeah, let's see, 5 years. So I can tell you that 5 years ago, I did not think that I would be where I am and
Mm,
working with things that I'm working with. As a matter of fact, 5 years ago, I was like Snowflake, because their value proposition was like, you just like the way, sorry, teasing about Snowflake, but the first time I heard about Snowflake and they like, oh, you don't need to do anything, it just works. And being a very senior DBA who specialized in performance tuning, I rolled my eyes and I said, a bad query will always be a bad query. So just kind of, but now I love Snowflake. So things change. So 5 years from now, I think we, on the practical kind of side, will be forced to optimize our platforms. I think the cost will get just so ridiculously high. We will be forced to look at how we're using cloud,
yeah,
which I think is great. Um, Unfortunately, we'll get to a bad point. I also think that whoever's lagging, who is still in a data center, who shouldn't really be in a data center, they'll finally migrate, which hopefully makes sense. Let's see what else. Um, I think we'll also get to a point where we have so much data, we'll reconsider traditional data warehouse modeling. So we have so many copies, and I think that's where also various compliances will come through. Like we can't copy the same data across multiple places. So there's going to be a lot of like virtualization, if you will, where you kind of like virtualize your transformations. Maybe I'm kind of like optimistic and hopeful, but we'll see.
yeah,
What else? And actually, cross-cloud data sharing.
yeah,
This is my dream, kind of to our earlier discussion about SFTP and moving data, sharing data by SFTP. It would be amazing if we could just data share with each other and protect, any sort of PII or compliant data, do, data clean rooms. Like imagine data clean rooms across various clouds.
yeah.
How cool would that be?
Yeah. Yeah, and I know like there are some companies that are coming up that are aiming to do something similar to that, like especially because like for example Snowflake and Databricks, they're probably never going to create some sort of like data sharing ability between the two.
Easy data sharing ability. Not
uh,
natively. Mhm.
yeah, exactly. Yeah, well maybe they'll give it there, but it'll be just hard enough that you'll be like, maybe I should just use the other option. But I know there's a few solutions that are trying to solve that.
The other thing completely like out of like craziness. So we are storing a lot of data, right? Like there's more and more data, and I don't know if hardware will keep up with it.
Mm,
So far, it's been keeping up, but I think at some point, I don't know, maybe there's going to be some amazing innovation for like how well we can compress or some, innovation in the hardware space. But um, imagine what I was kind of thinking. I was like, okay, cool. If I'm in the, I don't know, AWS US East zone, if there was some sort of like a Waze type of thing, it's like, oh, there's saturation in this data center. I'm going to move you over to like Azure West.
yeah,
That would be just to load balance where data lives across like global data centers.
yeah,
But then, of course, we get into whole compliance. Your data can't leave the country, but it would be cool.
yeah.
We'll see.
Yeah, it's crazy how much like Facebook is again. I now brought up like 3 times, but like they were always constantly like out of space. Like every two, like they're like in sense that like, but they're aware that by the time they build their next data center, they're going to need to build their next data center, right? Like
Yeah.
once they finish that, they need to start the next one because they will be out of space in that next data center by the time the next one finishes. So it's like this constant race of like we need to build more.
And
Um,
perhaps we will land in the limitation again, where while we're in the cloud, we're still kind of like limited. And like I'm excited. I think when we become a little more desperate, that's where true innovation really happens
yeah,
because we have no choice but to come up with the solution.
yeah,
I know it's like a bad way to think about things, but like
true.
so
Yeah,
it'll be interesting. But I'm definitely looking forward like streaming data. How do we model streaming data? How do we how do we stream data into the model that enables integration but without doing like your kind of like more traditional, stage and transformation, all that. That'll be interesting to see.
yeah. Are there any terms or hype that you feel like you'd like to remove from this industry? And
Um,
if you're friends with someone, I don't want to let me not be careful not to burn any bridges.
I think so. What bothers me, and I'll tell you what bothered me yesterday or the
Ooh,
day before, I read a blog called Data Modeling that described transformation model in DBT. And I was like, this is not a data model. Why are we calling it a data model? I think I would love for us to just agree on terminology. I don't think we ever will, but that like kind of hit home really. Uh, DBT model is a transformation model. Same like machine learning model is not the same as data model. Like, can we just like, it's not that many. Can we agree on definitions? So not gonna pick up on that, but I mean, I love. There's a lot of interesting things that people put out there. Kind of being in the world that I live in, where like how I grew up in my career, a lot of it is not applicable to every company. The other thing that I always like I'm concerned about, are we building something for the sake of building it because it's cool? Or is there really value? I can't tell you how many times I've seen somebody come out of, you know, a big company like Facebook come in and is like, we're gonna do, streaming and Hadoop, and I was like, but we just have 100 transactions per hour. Do we like, do we really need all of that? And I don't know if it's like me being short-sighted, maybe the company will grow to a gazillion things per second, or maybe it's just like how do we balance that? I know we look up to people, and we kind of like try to mimic them, but like let's focus on what's in front of us and the value that we provide to our current company, whatever they need.
Yeah. It's the pros and cons of like sharing all those technical blogs. It's like, yes, it
Yep.
gets everyone excited, but it's like, but they're fixing very large problems. Like again, going back to the MySQL thing, it's like, yes, they probably have a crazy thing that's dealing with the distributed data and multiple servers, running all over the world in order to solve that problem. If you're selling business only locally to the US and only have 10,000 customers, you don't have that problem.
Yeah.
It's
Yeah.
just not a problem. Um, Cool. Well, now I'm going to start doing some Q&A. So I have a few questions here from people. I need to figure out how to make sure you can see them, because I can see them, you can't see them. So one question that someone asked is, what is a good data modeling book apart from Kimball and Inman? We all say that.
Ooh, that's a great question. I honestly can't think of any, and it's unfortunate because I've learned like in real life from the team I was working with everything. So I don't really have books on that. Uh, but I'll look it up. I know there was a chat somewhere else recently around books. So Ben, I can share with you, and if you want to share with the audience.
Perfect. Yeah, because someone else also asked for your link,
Yeah.
or I think this is probably the one from Kent that you maybe referenced, the short book. I assume they just said
Oh,
link to the last book, and I assume that was the one you were thinking of.
which one did I mention?
The Data Vault book, I think.
Oh, I can share a link to, if you want to learn about Data Vault resources, I actually have a blog out that just a collection of various resources, and it has a few different books. Oh, probably Kent book. Yeah, Kent's book is one of those.
Okay,
So Ben, I
perfect.
can share with, or you can just find me on Medium.
Yes. Oh, on Medium. I put
Yeah,
their LinkedIn below, so at least you
yeah,
can follow her there and then
yeah.
maybe somehow find it. But let's see. Do you want to get an Inman Kimball battle or just stay out of that one?
Data Vault. Sorry, not a minute battle. I mean, how many botched dimensional models I've seen? Like I call it flatten the hell out of it. Like it's fascinating. So yeah, Data Vault. Then
Mm.
listed all the way. Sorry.
That's funny. Let me see. So this one's done. Just because this comes up every once in a while, and people are wondering like, what kind of math do they need for data engineering? I'll let you answer that. I'm like, I think I have an answer,
You
but
you don't. I just liked math only because it was logical. And I think if you're just a logical person, I mean, I honestly like, I mean, forgive me, but undergrad college degree is just showing that you can sit down, study, and try to understand and memorize stuff, which is great. And also, like, you explore different things. When I was getting my master's, I learned program management and software development methodologies, Perl. Uh, nobody's using. Hated Java, love VB.NET, not using either. But so yeah, like I wouldn't focus on kind of like specific math. I think if you have logical reasoning, you're fine.
yeah, I actually found I remember I took a logic course prior to my first computer science course, and that was one of the most helpful things prior to my
Yeah.
computer science course. It's like, oh, this seems somewhat familiar for some reason.
I mean, like diff equations, I don't remember a thing from that class.
Yeah.
Or calculus. Like I remember some algebra for some reason. I don't know why. Again, I don't think I ever used it. But
yeah. At most, you're gonna be implementing like some metrics where it's some sort of a ratio.
well, but that's like some maximum, like that's basic math.
Exactly. That's what I'm
Yeah.
saying. Like at
Yeah.
most, these
Yeah.
so some number divided by another number.
Yeah.
Find population A. So actually, epidemiology was another kind of thing that like really, I think helped. Like, there's not necessarily math in it per se,
Mhm.
but there is math. I shouldn't say there is math in it, but like the way of thinking about populations, because you're
Mhm.
often thinking about that in a lot of your analytics in terms of like
Yeah.
segmentation and things like that. But it's
Yeah.
not like math heavy.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
that was something I remember. All right, this one seems like a pretty extensive question. So, how would you model your data warehouse to be suitable both for data folks and non-data folks, so that the latter can perform self-service BI easily, and the former don't lose flexibility with granularity
All right.
or
I'm going to
granularity?
answer, but I'm going to answer and then I'm going to answer Data Vault. Here's why. No, I was like, I'll get a kick out of it. So Data Vault has kind of like two parts to it. There's the raw Data Vault where you model it, focused on business but it's also reflecting raw data. So your column names are as they come from the source, or the values are as they come from the source, and it's historical and auditable. So the cool thing about Data Vault is it's additive. If you're like a new source system comes along, you had, I don't know, one system that manages your customers. Now you have another one because you model it based on customer, you just append it. So as you change, business changes, you append it, your relationship change, you create different links. For your analytics, you present that data in information marts. And that could be your dimensional model, it could be flat tables, it could be whatever it is. It's living on top of your data vault. So you kind of like abstract that business logic from your business folks,
Mm-hmm.
and they're using whatever they're familiar with. Like, so you can put, and the other cool thing is like, and this is where I think we should, like, optimization will help a ton. If your information marts are virtual, like views,
Mm-hmm.
like you create your kind of like transformations, the aggregations, whatever, on top of physical data vault tables, deploying changes is like a breeze. You just adjust it and it's already there. You don't copy data. So I mean, like, honestly, I think Data Vault makes it easy to have your business folks use your kind of like friendly format, whatever they used to, which is, terminology, naming conventions are based on how business talks
Mm-hmm.
about it. And then your Data Vault reflects your source systems organized by business concept. And it's very easy to adjust. And again, it's also the other thing I absolutely love about Data Vault is if you make a mistake, because you have everything, you can easily build your new structure layout
Mm.
and just load everything. So I'm like, okay, you like can't screw it up. If you screw up a transformation, you lose data, right? You're like, oopsie. But with Data Vault, like it feels good to have backup plan.
Yeah. Yeah. I think was it just why did my thoughts just decide to leave me? I was trying to think of something and now it's gone. Perfect. Is it gone? It might be gone.
It'll come back like all of a sudden.
It'll come
And
back.
again, granularity, flexibility, you can present, data in aggregated form too. One, information mart, you can have it at the lowest grain in another because your data vault captures data at the lowest grain as
Yeah.
it comes from source system.
I just remembered what it was. My point was, it sounds like the only major issue with Data Vault is it has a marketing issue, which is everyone just assumes it's like, that sounds hard.
Yeah,
Um,
I am like, which is why I'm like, it's not. Like, I know it's like there's like some sort of level of mystery around it, and people like, and honestly, like books that so far been written, like pretty hard to read. But I know there's a lot of interest in data vault right now, and people are trying to like make it a little bit more accessible. It absolutely not like hard. It's not trivial. Nothing is in data, but it's not hard. Don't be scared.
don't be scared.
Don't be scared.
You
It's like
kind of
learning how to drive. You should watch my presentation. It is exactly like learning how to drive.
there you go. All right, so this one's kind of, I think we kind of discussed it a little bit, but maybe we can do a short answer. What skills or traits do you look for when hiring a data team? Any specific tech or programming languages?
So I don't know if that's a question to you or to me.
Oh, I assume like I'm not hiring anyone, so I assume it's more
All
for
right,
you.
well, I can answer. Well, it depends on your team and your environment, right? I know, like, okay, let me make a statement, and I know somebody will roll. SQL is a must. Like, I don't. If you're like, oh, I'm a data analyst, but I only know Python, then you're not a data analyst. I'm sorry. Like, SQL is the most fundamental. Yeah, it's not perfect, but like it'll get you pretty far. So for me, SQL is the best. Python, I see a lot of.
Hmm.
It seems to be the cool thing. You know, JavaScript was before that. PowerShell, like things come and go, but in general, again, but I think it also heavily depends on your environment, your company. You might be looking for people that know how to use Informatica or whatever it is that, you know, your environment has.
Yeah. Do you have a hard stop at 4 before I keep going?
No, we
Okay,
can we
cool,
can
cool.
move if there are questions. Yeah.
Yeah, there's still are. Yeah, I think that's interesting. You brought up PowerShell because I was like, yeah, that was especially for like in a Microsoft shop, and probably still is like such a common thing to use, other than
Mhm.
besides Python. It's just like, yeah, we'll
Yeah.
just do PowerShell, because it works nicely with like all the other Microsoft
Yeah.
things.
And it
Um,
works just as well. It's a scripting language. You do what you have to do, but again, like for data, like if we talk about Python, Snowpark Python, right? It translates into SQL. Like I can just write SQL. And again, I love SQL. I've been writing it for many years, so I'm also biased.
Yeah. Yeah, I do find that there's often two camps in that space. I mean, I'm sure there's some middle ground, but like it's a lot of like you're a data management person, so you grew up with SQL and so SQL is what you do, or you're more of the data science person, so you're coming in with pandas and like
Yeah,
that's like this is what I do, and it's like
yeah,
so yeah. And then you're gonna if you are that data science person, you're gonna have to learn SQL.
yeah.
In most cases, it's like and most interviews will have you do SQL, so you'll have to
hmm
learn a little bit either way.
And it's not that hard. Like it's like probably one of the easiest languages to learn too.
Yeah.
Programming language, if we can even call it a programming language.
Yeah. How do we envision data modeling practice evolve in data strategy vision of a product or application? Is that? I wonder if this is clear. I picked this up and now I'm like,
I can make some assumptions and
okay,
answer the way I want to,
perfect.
which is not what you should be doing with data. Never make assumptions. Define your business concept, and I think data model is helping with that. So I think to me, data model is a big part of kind of like a data governance program, but also data literacy, right?
Yeah.
When people have somewhere to go, and I say like good old data dictionary, when people have a common place to go with a well-defined in words data dictionary, you're just enabled a bunch of people to kind of like help themselves. I mean, obviously, hopefully they know SQL, or maybe they know how to use visualization tool, or maybe they can pull data into Excel and manipulate it. That's fine. But that's so, and again, data modeling also for me fits into cost, into FinOps. A
Hmm.
well-defined data model helps optimize, your queries. So application, if I'm thinking in terms of whether it's data mesh or data sharing or data products or data marketplace, again, you have to have a well-defined model. You have to have a really well-defined product that you're delivering. So I think like data models, honestly, like core, it's the foundation of data in general.
Yeah, that makes sense. I think
And
you
I'm
brought
sorry if I
oh,
didn't answer your question. So
yeah, that
I
was,
love vague questions. I can just pick whatever answer I want.
yeah. I picked it up and I was like, oh, I thought I read this better, but I did not reading it out loud. Okay, so this one is a near real-time data warehouse even possible? So even with logical replication, you'd still need to build views on top of each other, which may perform quite slow. So any
I,
thoughts there?
I agree. So define near real time. I'm gonna be like such a what I usually do, but what do you mean by that? What is your definition of that? I walked
Yeah.
in there like we want real time analytics. I'm like, you understand we have to copy data from one place to another, transform it. That's already not real time. So what is your definition of near real time? I think you can achieve some things in near real time. I don't think you can do everything. in near real time, I'm thinking like minute, right? Less
Yeah.
than a minute. I think this is where you'll have to figure out what is the value
Yeah.
and how much you're willing to pay to make it near real time. You can throw the largest compute at this, and I'm sure it'll fly through, but is it really worth it? So I think this is where like another one of those, it depends. It depends on the situation and the value that you provide.
Yeah, I think that's like one thing I've run into with a few clients too, where it's like they want real time, but you're like, okay, let's say you're already on Snowflake. It's like, what you're asking for is to
Mhm.
essentially have Snowflake running all the time, more than likely. Like your data is
Yeah.
going to be hitting it at such a rate that it's going to be, you're paying for it every minute or every. So is that what you want to pay? And is it driving the value that's
Yeah.
worth that at the end of the day? Or is it like maybe every 15 minutes and you're good? You know, and you can
And,
use
and there,
Snowpipe too, but yeah, anyways, go
yeah,
ahead.
and it's like you walk through it, but again, maybe there are cases where you're like, yeah, we actually we can use this near real-time data for competitive advantage, and it's worth it for us. The other thing, there's some like interesting not even interesting, some architectures to accomplish this. You can pre-calculate historical data and just append real-time current data. So there are ways you can play around with it, but again, like, do you really like? Is it a nice to have? Is it a must have? And it'll end up costing you if you have a lot of data. Yeah.
Yeah. Let's see. So this one's interesting. So when is it a good idea to start adding more granularity in terms of data teams? So like if more specialization, essentially, like when you start adding a governance layer or all these like almost individual people, and then eventually individual teams.
Um, my experience, again, my opinion is like I walk in as the only engineer, right? So I walked into a team. They're like, all right, team of one, awesome. I'm like, okay, I'll bring in tools. They accomplish some things. Oops, I ran into an issue where I need to do something that I don't know how to do.
Mm,
To me, that's like, okay, cool, we have to grow. I think specifically, again, I think it's growth and maturity. You don't want to have a massive team. And I think if you have a very small team, you'll start realizing that there is something that you have to do that you don't have a skill set for. And you either bring a tool in or a person.
mm,
So it really depends. I think that's another important trade-off that the non-modern data stack kind of gives us. So anything that's like is standard that has been done already, bring a tool in.
yeah.
They're like, there is a team behind it. They're really responsible. They're reliable. You don't need a person to reinvent the wheel. Bring a person in for like, analytics engineering, or to even like data governance is interesting one. I think some of it you can kind of do together as a team, divide and conquer. As companies mature, obviously, and more compliances come along, then you'll need like a dedicated function to that. So I'm sorry, another it depends answer.
I mean, I think that's the world of being an engineer. It's always like, well, there's so many things to
Yeah.
consider. And okay, so I'm gonna kind of group these two questions. So I'll flash them up on screen. So one person was like, when would you not use a data vault? Followed by two, which is, can you suggest any data modeling design pattern to deal with big data, not with a big data, with big data. I feel like
Okay,
kind of
I'm not gonna pick. Okay, so
you can pick one if
when
you feel like they can't answer
okay,
them together. But I
when
was
would
like,
I not use Data Vault? I would not use Data Vault if I have a very strong team that knows how to do dimensional models.
okay,
I I love Data Vault. I think it's amazing, but dimensional model can work perfectly fine if you have people that actually do it well. So fair. I would not do Data Vault if I have a very small team at a startup.
yeah,
It's a little bit too much. Get to know your data first. Doesn't make sense. I would not do, and I think that's it. I'm also a data hoarder, so like I was like, I wanted to write a blog of like how data vault fits my personality. So it's kind of like, again, it clicks with me. I get it. If you completely don't get it, if you hate it, just don't do it. Like it's not. It's an option. It's a. I always say it's a tool in your tool belt. Use it if it's applicable, but don't if you're like 100% against it or you don't see value. Um, what is big data? And here's um, and here is something you're probably gonna laugh at. So whatever, I don't know, 7, 8 years ago. On my resume, I put an experience working with very large DBs, VLDBs. I don't know if you remember. That database was 1.5 terabytes.
Mm.
I roll. 1.5 terabytes now is like I have a table that's bigger than that. So
Yeah.
if you're kind of thinking along the terms of streaming, um, you can stream into Data Vault directly. I haven't done that yet. I haven't come across quite yet use cases that require streaming. So like if you load a bunch of records every 5 minutes, that's micro batching, not streaming. So, but truly streaming, truly data events coming in out of sync, you can do it with Data Vault. I haven't tried it, so I don't know how well that works. But I think like kind of like back to your question about the next 5 years, I think there's going to be more use cases and kind of like we'll figure out a pattern how to deal with that data.
Yeah, yeah, I think that's really what it is. It's like people kind of crystallizing a pattern, especially when you're talking about streaming. It's like that's it's kind of it's not necessarily like data vault level of like wow that's hard to approach, but I think that's like most people's mental model of it, and that's why most people are like I'm just not going to do it because it's
Yeah.
like it sounds hard. And obviously there's tools that are trying to make it simple, but when that's the mental kind of model, it's hard to shift people's perception.
Yeah.
So yeah. Uh, Someone asked, where is this question? Oh, the data contracts. Any opinions, or are you going to
Wait,
keep?
I was trying to actually avoid that conversation. So I mean, it's a great idea.
Yeah.
Is it applicable to every company? No, just like
Mm,
data mesh isn't.
yeah.
And here's kind of like the story. So I worked with software engineers for a very long time. Asking them to standardize on something and not introduce breaking changes, they don't like. I am sorry, they have no interest in that. It's extra time for them. I think that's where like to me, unless there is in the so when teams standardize, kind of like back to your data governance question, when there are rules, hard rules that we'll agree to, things become much easier.
Hmm.
And that's kind of like what data contract is to me,
Yeah.
right? Like we agree, these are the rules, this is how we interact with each other. That's awesome. I think in many companies it's just not possible. Especially the other thing like I think about, not every company is a software company. Many companies just use various different tools
Mm.
and data sources. You can't, there's an upgrade to, I don't know. I actually give you another example. So Salesforce, let's hate on Salesforce for a little bit. How many times have you had to completely redo your Salesforce because whoever manages Salesforce redone how, like they've completely rebuilt how their like contacts and whatever are done, and there's all this roll-ups and relationships and formulas. How do you build a contract with that?
Yeah.
They've adjusted a tool to kind of like to their new business rules or their new learnings or whatever. This is not software that we're writing like somebody managed. Like I just think the human part of it is difficult. So and hopefully I know it'll make everybody's life easier if we have contracts, but I don't know if it's like how difficult it will be to actually implement everywhere.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I think it's definitely like one of those things that it's going to fit some companies probably really really well, and
Yeah.
some companies it's like it's going to be more than they need. I also can tell you like yeah, software engineers, it's just their goal, and it's not so much that they don't care about data, it's that their goal is to make a functional product. Like
Deliver
that's their focus.
capabilities, right?
Yeah.
Like they deliver specific capability. Outside of that, it's additional work. And honestly, like again, like worked with software engineers a lot. They hated relational data, like relational design third normal form, and
Yes.
and and that's like that's fine because they're the way their brain works. And I swear, like data people think differently. We think in
Yeah.
batches, sets.
Yeah.
They think very like linear. Like there's one transaction. NoSQL works amazingly well when you only query that database with one ID,
Yeah.
right? That's how they think, that's how they write code. And it's cool because they're awesome at software engineering. We're awesome at data. We can't like, I would probably suck at, I actually failed one interview once because the person who interviewed me was a software engineer. And he asked me, like, I was thinking it sets.
Yeah.
He was thinking very linearly. And it was like, I'm like, this is amazing. This is exactly why you're good at what you do, and I'm good at what I do, and we
Yeah.
shouldn't probably do each other's jobs.
Yeah.
So
That's
yeah.
why they use ORMs.
Ugh.
They're like, oh, I just want to use this ORM.
That's another hour and a half. I was like, no.
Well, I don't know if you've seen the from Jordan Lewis. He's got this like iceberg of SQL, so like going down in like knowledge. And I think like level 2 is like ORMs, and just like it just says ORMs, and like 2 levels down it's like ORMs writes shitty SQL or something.
No, I haven't seen that one. That's like that would hit close to home. But it's, I mean, every BI tool, right,
Yeah.
is effectively, it has to create SQL and whatever that is, and you can't. I mean, that's why we will never be replaced by robots.
Yeah. Oh man, I think there's actually a YouTube creator who wants to, and I'm hoping he does this, is going to try to do a whole like data engineering project with like Chat GPT, where like he like asked Chat GPT to write some sort of SQL query. I'm like, I want to see like, let's see what happens. Like, what do you got to fix? Like, what does it work? I mean, if it works, hey, please take my job.
So somebody shared with me, it's like, I asked ChatGPT for like data strategy, and it gave me, I'm like, matches mine. Cool.
Matches the 30 blogs that exist, and it's
Yeah,
spent
it's like
online.
we all agree that we should work on the same things.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah, yeah. It's very funny. Also, just a quick point on in terms of like Salesforce hate. I think everyone's in the data space is currently hating them after their Tableau announcement. We're just like,
Yeah.
we don't want Tableau in Salesforce. Leave it alone. Let it
Yeah.
be its own thing. No one wanted it to be
It's
combined.
it's kind of like the the interesting evolution of BI tools. That's another thing. Like, I don't know what BI tools would look like in 5 years. Looker acquired by Google. Will they, assimilate it? What happens to Tableau? Power BI is going to take over the world. I don't know.
I think Power BI probably. I'm wouldn't be surprised if it's the most used, but that's also because Microsoft has
Yeah.
so much reach that it's great.
Yeah.
But it's definitely like Tableau, Power BI, and maybe Looker. Looker definitely is kind of this teetering thing where I'm like, it could hold, but we'll see. And then there's a whole new generation of solutions. But I'm still surprised that like Tableau is held around for 2 years or 2 decades, almost. I think it's 2003 or 2008.
Yeah.
So it's honestly like you look at like data warehouses, like those we've gone through more of those than we've gone through in terms of popularity, in terms of BI tools. So it's a hard space.
Yep.
All right, maybe one more question and then we'll break so that we can enjoy the rest of our day. What do you think is a better warehouse dimensional model? I think it's been more of like, what do you prefer? Do you prefer Azure or do you prefer Snowflake?
So you can build a dimensional model that performs well on any sort of column store.
Yeah.
So period. Now, Azure CNAPS, like, first of all, like, okay, a disclaimer, and then like maybe a few more disclaimers. I'm a Snowflake data superhero for a reason,
Yes.
because I absolutely love the platform. I grew up with SQL Server. I love SQL Server, spend a lot of time with it. CNAPS is nowhere near the maturity of Snowflake. I hope I'm actually like, it's sad to see that it's lagging so much, but it's just missing a lot of things that Snowflake kind of gives you out of the box.
Yeah.
One of the great examples is somebody's like, oh shit, I forgot to shut down Azure Synapse, whatever, and it cost me like $1,500.
Yeah.
So like basic stuff like that, I hope to see it mature. I mean, they have like a data platform, data engine that they can use. I'm like kind of like disappointed that they're not further along than they really are.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, you can build dimensional model anywhere on
Yeah.
any column store.
Yeah.
Oracle, Teradata. Let's go way back. I don't know, DB2.
Oh man, I feel bad for DB2. It's just it's there. It's there. I don't know who's using it, but someone's using it. Someone's got a good relationship with IBM, and they're like, we still use DB2.
Yeah.
Like, it exists. I do know it exists. Yeah, I know. I have to be like, I'm trying to be better about not always referencing Snowflake, because I'm like, I can't just reference Snowflake, and I'm not a data superhero. I just like Snowflake. So I need to work on that.
And by the way, again, when they first kind of approached me, their messaging was that they actually rubbed me the wrong way, and I was like, yeah, I don't think so. But I think like value proposition right now, I think they kind of like have the most features and the easier to use features. So, and I think, I don't know, Ben, if it was you who said, or maybe it was Aaron. So there's like some data teams are business focused, business driven, so they want more of a turnkey solution. And other teams are more like heavily engineers, and that's where like Databricks comes through. I honestly see a world where the team would need both, depending on the use case. And I'm personally, I'm excited. Like, I don't know why they're having battles. I think it's silly. But for me as a user, I'm like, cool. The more, the better. I have more options.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think you just covered a reason why maybe you don't even need Snowflake every time, which is like features. I think
Yeah.
Ben Stansel wrote a whole article where it's like we're just creating a database with a ton of extra features. If you honestly have a very simple use case, you don't need data sharing, you don't want all this stuff. You've got a small data. Yeah, go on Postgres or
Yeah.
SQL Server, or you can make those into data. Like I've seen those be used as data warehouses successfully. They don't need to be a cloud data warehouse, or like a fancy cloud data warehouse
Right.
that's like fully tuned. Obviously, it's best to do it on a column data warehouse, but
Yep. Yeah,
or a
exactly.
column database. Sorry, does it have to be? I mean, depends. It's
Right,
better,
exactly,
but
right.
it's
Yep.
better. But I've seen people do it without it.
Yep.
But you can use Green Plum. There's so many options that are arguably cheaper, and if that's your goal, you can make that happen. So, yeah. That's pretty much all the questions, and I don't want to keep you too much longer. We're here an hour and 15 minutes later. So I thank everyone who's shown up. We've had like, I think anywhere from like good 60, 70 people between LinkedIn and YouTube. So thanks all for showing up. Thanks so much, Veronika. I really appreciate your time. There was so much that I've learned and gathered. So I'm going to hit end broadcast, and then, actually, do you want to say goodbye to everyone first?
Yeah, goodbye, Aaron. Thank you so much. Thank you for having me, Ben. Always such a pleasure chatting with you. So hopefully we'll keep running into each other.
Perfect. Yes, I'm going to hit end broadcast. Thank you all again, and